The millionaire laughed when the maid's son said he spoke 3 languages. He mocked the boy until minutes later the kid translated something that revealed a dangerous secret, and that changed everything. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the Thornton mansion at precisely 7:43 p.m., but it wasn't an accident. It was the exact moment Elena Martinez realized her son was about to change everything. She had begged God that morning, literally begged on her knees in their one-room apartment, hands clasped so tight, her knuckles turned white. "Just today," she whispered into the silence. "Please, just let me get through today without losing this job." Her babysitter had canceled at 6 a.m. No warning, no apology. Just a text message that made Elena's stomach drop. "Sorry, can't make it." Danny was 9 years old. Old enough to understand that his mother worked cleaning other people's houses. Old enough to know they couldn't afford to lose another job. Old enough to stay quiet in corners and make himself invisible. But not old enough for what was about to happen. "You cannot bring him here." Richard Thornton stood in the servants' entrance, blocking the doorway like a wall of expensive cologne and barely contained irritation. His eyes moved from Elena's worn shoes to her son's backpack, calculating something she couldn't name. "Elena, we've discussed boundaries." "Mr. Thornton, Elena's voice cracked. She hated that sound, the sound of desperation. "My sitter canceled and I have nowhere." "This is a business dinner." He cut her off without raising his voice. That's what money did. It made you powerful enough not to shout. "I have investors flying in from Paris and Tokyo. Do you understand what that means?" Danny watched his mother's shoulders curl inward, making her smaller. He'd seen it happen before. Different houses, different men in suits, always the same ending. "He'll stay in the corner," Elena whispered. Her hand found Danny's shoulder, squeezing once. Their silent code. Be invisible. You won't even know he's there. Richard Thornton looked at Danny for exactly 3 seconds. It felt like an hour. Then he stepped aside. "One sound," he said. "One interruption, and you're both gone. Understood?" Elena nodded so hard her neck hurt. The mansion smelled like furniture polish and fresh flowers arranged by people who charged more per hour than Elena made in a day. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high Danny had to tilt his head back to see them. Every surface gleamed. Nothing was out of place, except him. Richard pointed to a cream-colored sofa near the grand staircase, far from the dining room but visible from every angle. "There," he said. "Don't touch anything." Danny sat. His feet didn't reach the floor. Elena disappeared into the kitchen, her head down, moving with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned to exist in spaces that weren't meant for her. Through the doorway, Danny could hear her working. The quiet clink of expensive plates. The soft rustle of cloth napkins being folded into perfect triangles. The investors arrived in stages. First came the laughter from the driveway. Then voices in the foyer, speaking languages Danny recognized, but Richard didn't expect him to. French and English, sliding in and out of each other like water. "The market analysis looks favorable," one man said in English, his accent sharp around the edges. "Bien sûr, but the risk allocation," another replied, switching to French mid-sentence, "needs clarification before we proceed." Danny's ears perked up. Not because he was trying to listen, because he couldn't help it. His mother called it a gift. His third-grade teacher called it unusual linguistic development. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman Elena used to work for, called it having an ear for music. Mrs. Chen had been French, married to an American, living in California with a grandson she hadn't seen in 12 years. She'd spent 3 years teaching Danny without meaning to, filling the silence of her big empty house with stories in 3 languages. "You remind me of him," she used to say, touching Danny's cheek with papery hands. "He would have been your age now." Then she was gone, and Elena lost that job too. Richard Thornton moved through the room like a conductor, orchestrating conversations, pouring wine, laughing at precisely the right moments. He wore confidence like another expensive suit. Danny made himself smaller on the sofa, pulled his knees up, opened a library book about ancient Egypt and pretended to read while the men talked business over appetizers that cost more than his school lunch for a month. "The terms are quite clear," one investor said in French, his tone smooth as silk. "Absolutely," Richard agreed in English. Crystal clear, but they weren't saying the same thing. Danny's head came up from his book. The French investor had just said something about adjustable terms while speaking English about fixed rates. The words didn't match, not even close. He looked at his mother, visible for a moment in the dining room doorway. She was watching him with wide eyes. "Don't," her expression said. "Please don't." Danny went back to his book, read the same sentence 4 times without understanding a single word. "How delightful," one of the wives said, noticing him for the first time. "Richard, you didn't mention you had a son." The room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "That's the help's kid," Richard said smoothly. "She had a childcare emergency." The woman's smile didn't falter, but something behind her eyes did. "Oh," she said. "How accommodating of you." No one looked at Danny after that. He ceased to exist again, just part of the furniture, less important than the chairs they sat on. Dinner was served. Elena moved between the kitchen and dining room like a ghost, filling water glasses before anyone noticed they were empty, removing plates before anyone finished chewing. Danny watched her hands shake slightly as she set down a platter of something that smelled like herbs and money. The conversation grew louder. Wine made people confident. Deals made them careless. "The liability clause," one investor said in French, leaning back in his chair. "It's quite favorable for us, no?" "Very favorable," another agreed in French. "He won't realize until it's too late." Richard raised his glass. "Gentlemen, I believe we have the foundation for something extraordinary." They toasted in 3 languages, clinked crystal that cost more than Danny's school tuition, smiled with teeth that had been professionally whitened, and Danny felt his heart start to pound, because Richard had just agreed to terms that weren't translated, liability that shifted entirely to him, an exit clause that only existed in French. The whole deal was structured in 2 different ways, depending on which language you understood. His mother appeared at his side, her face tight with warning. "Danny," she whispered, "not a word, not one word." "But Mom, no." She crouched down, her voice desperate. "Baby, I know what you're thinking. Don't. Please don't. He doesn't know what he's agreeing to. It's not our business." Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We don't get to have opinions in houses like this. We just work. We keep our heads down. We survive." Danny looked past her at Richard Thornton, who was signing something now, laughing, completely unaware that he was about to lose everything. "Mom, if you say anything," Elena's voice broke, "if you embarrass me in front of these people, I will lose this job, and it took me 3 months to find this one. 3 months, Danny. Do you understand what that means?" He understood. He understood they were 2 paychecks away from eviction, that his shoes were held together with duct tape, that his mother cried quietly in the bathroom when she thought he was asleep. But he also understood what was happening at that table. "Go to the kitchen," Elena said. "Please, just go wait in the kitchen until this is over." Danny stood, started walking toward the kitchen door, got 3 steps away. Then he heard Richard Thornton say, "Well, gentlemen, I think we're ready to finalize this. My lawyer will review the documents tomorrow, but I see no issues." "Parfait," the French investor said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "No issues at all." Danny stopped walking. His mother's hand grabbed his arm. "Danny, no. They're lying to him," Danny said. Not loud, but not quiet either. The dining room went silent. Richard Thornton turned slowly in his chair. His expression was polite confusion, the kind adults wear when children say something unexpected. "I'm sorry, what?" Elena's face went white. "Mr. Thornton, I apologize. He didn't mean—" "They're saying different things," Danny continued, his voice steadier now. "In English and French, it's not the same deal." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Richard Thornton laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. Not yet. It was the laugh of someone genuinely amused by something absurd. The other men joined in, polite chuckles, bemused smiles. "Well," Richard said, still smiling, "that's quite an imagination you have there, son." "I'm not your son," Danny said quietly, "and I'm not imagining it." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Richard's smile stayed in place, but his eyes went hard. "Elena, please remove your child from the dining area." "Yes, sir, right away. I'm so sorry." Elena grabbed Danny's arm harder. "Wait." One of the investors leaned forward, curiosity replacing amusement. "How do you know what we're saying?" Danny looked at his mother. She was shaking her head frantically, mouthing the word no over and over. "I speak 3 languages," Danny said. Portuguese, English, and French. The room exploded with laughter. Real laughter this time. Richard Thornton nearly choked on his wine. 3 languages, he repeated, wiping his eyes. Oh, that's rich. That's absolutely rich. Richard, one of the wives tried. Maybe he... A 9-year-old from... Richard gestured vaguely at Elena, at Danny, at everything they represented. Tells me he speaks 3 languages. What's next? Is he going to critique my wine selection? The investors were laughing now. Not cruelly, just the way people laugh at something impossible. Like a dog doing calculus, like a fish riding a bicycle. Elena's face crumpled. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thornton. He watches videos online and he thinks... I don't think, Danny said. His voice cracked. I know, and they're cheating you. The laughter stopped. Richard Thornton stood up, slowly, like a storm gathering itself. Get him out, he said quietly. Now. They said in French that the liability is all yours, Danny said quickly, the words tumbling out. That the exit clause lets them walk away without penalty, but you can't. In English, they told you it's equal. It's not equal. It's a trap. Elena, Richard's voice could have frozen water. Remove your child. The clause de sortie is quite favorable for us, Danny said in perfect French. He won't understand until he signs. The room went dead silent. One of the French investors' faces changed, just for a second. But Danny saw it. Richard saw it too. What did you just say? Richard asked slowly. That's what they said 15 minutes ago. Danny pulled away from his mother's grip. While you were pouring wine, they said in French that the exit clause is quite favorable for them, and you won't understand until you sign. But in English, they told you the terms are crystal clear and completely fair. That's... Richard looked at his investors. That's not... The risk allocation section, Danny continued. His voice was shaking now, but he couldn't stop. In English, they said it's distributed equally. In French, they said he assumes all the risks. Not them. You. Not them. You. One of the investors started to speak. Stopped. Started again in heavily accented English. This is a misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding, Danny said, his voice steady now. I heard every word. I heard every word. You've been running 2 different deals this whole time. One in English for Mr. Thornton. One in French for each other, and they don't match. Richard Thornton sat down slowly. His face had gone completely blank. The expensive kind of blank that came before extremely expensive decisions. Is this true? He asked his investors. Richard, let's discuss this rationally. Is it true? The silence that followed was the loudest thing Danny had ever heard. Elena sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. She was crying now, quiet, helpless tears. Richard picked up the contract, started reading. His jaw tightened with every line. Get out, he said finally, quiet, deadly. Richard, if you'll just... Get out of my house. The investors stood, gathered their papers, walked out without another word. Their wives followed, clutching designer purses, not looking at anyone. The front door closed. Then it was just 3 people in that massive dining room. Elena, Danny, and Richard Thornton, holding a contract that would have bankrupted him. Elena lifted her head. Mr. Thornton, I'll pack my things. Sit down, Richard said. She froze. Please, he added. And it was the please that made her sink back into the chair. Richard looked at Danny. Really looked at him for the first time. How old are you? 9. And you speak 3 languages? Yes, sir. Where did you learn? Danny glanced at his mother. She nodded barely. Mrs. Chen, he said. She used to be Mom's client. She was French and she was lonely and she taught me while Mom worked. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down the contract, rubbed his face with both hands, laughed once, but it wasn't a happy sound. I almost lost everything, he said to no one in particular. I almost signed away everything I've built, because I was too arrogant to listen to a 9-year-old. You didn't know, Danny said quietly. I didn't listen. Richard looked at him. There's a difference. Elena was still crying, but silently now. The kind of crying that comes from too many years of too much fear. Richard stood, walked to the window, looked out at his perfect lawn, his perfect cars, his perfect life that had almost fallen apart because he'd assumed perfection meant being right. I need to call my lawyer, he said finally. This whole deal needs to be reviewed, every word, every clause. He turned back to them. Elena, you're not fired. You're getting a raise, and your hours are changing. No more nights, no more weekends. And Danny, he stopped, started again. Danny can come here after school if he needs to. He can do homework in the library. He can eat dinner with us. A pause. If you want. Danny didn't know what to say. Neither did his mother. I heard you, Richard said quietly. Finally, I heard you. And I'm sorry it took almost losing everything for me to listen. He walked to the door. Stopped. The glass I broke earlier, he said. It was my grandfather's whiskey glass. He gave it to me when I made my first million. Told me to remember where I came from. He smiled, sad and small. I guess I forgot. Then he left them there. Elena and Danny, mother and son, still sitting in chairs they weren't supposed to touch, in a house that wasn't theirs, trying to understand what had just happened. Elena pulled Danny into a hug so tight he could barely breathe. She was still crying, but now she was laughing too. The kind of laugh that comes from relief so profound it feels like joy. You scared me to death, she whispered into his hair. Don't ever do that again. Okay. But also, she pulled back to look at him. Also, I'm so proud of you I could burst. Danny smiled, then frowned. Mom, do you think he meant it? About me coming here after school? Elena wiped her eyes, looked around the dining room, at the crystal and the china and the life she'd spent years cleaning but never touching. I don't know, baby, she said honestly. But I think we just found out that speaking up matters, even when you're scared. Maybe especially when you're scared. Upstairs, Richard Thornton sat in his office with his head in his hands. The contract sat on his desk, every page a reminder of his own blindness. His phone buzzed, his lawyer calling back, but he didn't answer. Instead, he thought about a 9-year-old boy who saw what he couldn't see, who spoke up when it cost him everything to do it, who was worth listening to despite wearing duct-tape shoes and carrying a second-hand backpack. He thought about Elena, who raised that boy while cleaning other people's toilets, who taught him to be brave even while teaching him to be invisible. And he thought about the glass he'd broken that afternoon, not accidentally. He'd thrown it against the wall in frustration over another business deal that felt wrong. The glass had shattered, just like his assumptions. Maybe it was time to break a few more things, like the rules that said some people mattered and others didn't, like the belief that money meant being right, like the walls between people who served and people who were served. Maybe it was time to listen. The phone buzzed again. This time, Richard answered. Tom, he said to his lawyer, clear your schedule. We need to review every contract I've signed in the past 5 years, and then, he paused. Then I need you to draw up some paperwork for a scholarship fund, for talented kids who need a chance. What brought this on? His lawyer asked. Richard looked at the broken glass still scattered on his office floor, at the contract that would have ruined him, at the view from his window that suddenly looked different. Let's just say, he said quietly, someone reminded me what I'd forgotten. He hung up, went back downstairs, found Elena and Danny still in the dining room looking lost. Have you two eaten? Richard asked. They shook their heads. Then let's fix that, he said. And Danny, while we eat, why don't you tell me about Mrs. Chen? She sounds like someone worth knowing. For the first time in 9 years, Danny Martinez sat at a dining room table that wasn't in his own home and didn't feel like he was trespassing. His mother sat beside him, her back straight for the first time all day. And Richard Thornton sat across from them, learning what it meant to listen to voices he'd spent a lifetime ignoring. The crystal still gleamed. The chandeliers still sparkled. The mansion was still perfect. But something fundamental had shifted. Something that started with breaking glass and ended with breaking down the walls that separated people into categories of worth. It started with a boy who refused to be invisible, and it would change everything. Danny woke up at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of his mother crying in the bathroom. Not the loud kind of crying. The kind she tried to hide behind running water and closed doors. The kind that made his chest hurt because he knew exactly what it meant. She thought they'd lost everything. He pressed his ear against the thin door. Mom? The water shut off. Silence. Then her voice, too bright, too forced. I'm fine, baby. Go back to sleep. It's almost 6. Danny leaned his forehead against the door. And you're not fine. The lock clicked. Elena opened the door, her eyes red but dry now. She'd wiped away the evidence, but Danny had learned to read the things she couldn't hide. The trembling hands. The way she held herself too still, like moving might crack her open. "I had a bad dream," she lied. "About last night." It wasn't a question. Elena sank onto the edge of the bathtub, suddenly looking decades older than her 32 years. "Danny, I need you to understand something. What you did yesterday. I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I know I should have stayed quiet. I know I embarrassed you. Stop." Elena grabbed his shoulders, looking him straight in the eyes. "Don't you dare apologize for being right. Don't you ever apologize for speaking the truth." Danny blinked. "But you said—" "I was scared. I'm still scared." Her voice cracked. "Because men like Richard Thornton, they say things in the moment. Beautiful things. But when the sun comes up and they remember who we are—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "You think he'll fire you today?" Elena stood, turned away, started folding towels that didn't need folding. "I think we need to be prepared for anything. Which means you go to school like normal. You don't tell anyone what happened. And when I come home early today, we start looking for my next job." He said a lot of things, Danny, after almost losing millions of dollars. After being humiliated by a 9-year-old in front of investors. She finally looked at him. People say what they need to say in moments like that. It doesn't mean they mean it when reality sets in. Danny wanted to argue. Wanted to believe that last night had changed something fundamental. But he'd learned early that hope was expensive, and they couldn't afford to buy too much of it. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll go to school." Elena kissed his forehead, holding on a second too long. "I love you, no matter what happens today." "Love you too, Mom." She left for the Thornton mansion at 6:30 a.m., her uniform pressed, her face carefully blank. Danny watched from their apartment window as she walked to the bus stop, her shoulders curved inward against the morning cold, or maybe against what was coming. The Thornton mansion looked different in daylight, less like a palace, more like what it actually was, a statement. Every perfectly trimmed hedge screamed, "I have money." Every gleaming window reflected back the world that didn't belong to people like Elena Martinez. She used her key to enter through the service entrance. The kitchen was empty, usually Mrs. Chen. No, that was the other house, years ago. Usually nobody was here this early except Elena. But today, Richard Thornton sat at the kitchen counter drinking coffee from a mug that probably cost more than her weekly paycheck. Elena froze. "Mr. Thornton, I didn't expect— I can come back." "Sit down, Elena." Her heart stopped. This was it. The speech before the firing. The "you're a good worker" but conversation that always ended the same way. "Sir, if this is about last night—" "Sit down." Not angry, just firm. Elena sat, her hands folded tight in her lap, bracing for impact. Richard set down his coffee. He looked tired, like he'd been up all night. "I called my lawyer at midnight," he said. "Woke him up. Made him review every document those investors sent me." Elena said nothing. What could she say? Danny was right about everything. Every single word. Richard laughed, but it sounded broken. The liability clause, the exit terms, the risk allocation, it was all structured to bankrupt me if anything went wrong. And they buried it in French, knowing I'd never catch it because I was too arrogant to hire a proper translator. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "Why are you apologizing? Your son saved me from the biggest mistake of my career." He stood, paced to the window. "Do you know what I did after you left last night?" Elena shook her head. "I sat in my office and looked at every business deal I've made in the last 5 years. Every contract. Every negotiation. And you know what I realized?" He turned to face her. "I've been making decisions based on confidence instead of competence. On image instead of information. I've been so sure I was the smartest person in every room that I stopped actually listening to anyone. Mr. Thornton, a 9-year-old had to save me from myself." He laughed again, that same broken sound. "A 9-year-old who sits in corners trying to be invisible, while I parade around thinking I'm invincible." The silence stretched. Elena didn't dare break it. "I meant what I said last night," Richard said finally. "About the raise, about the hours, about Danny being welcome here." He paused. "But I need to know if you trust that. Because if you don't, If you think I'm just saying words because I feel guilty, then we need to have a different conversation. Elena looked up at him. Really looked. She'd cleaned this man's house for 6 months, but this was the first time she'd ever actually seen him as a person, instead of just an employer. A person who made mistakes, who felt embarrassed, who was trying, in his own clumsy way, to do something right. I'm scared, she admitted. We've been here before. Different houses, different promises. They always end the same way. I know. Richard sat back down. And I can't prove I'm different with words. I can only prove it with time, with action, with... He stopped, started again. My grandfather cleaned floors at a factory for 30 years. He saved every penny so my father could go to college. My father built a small business so I could have opportunities he never had. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that my success was built on the backs of people who cleaned floors. Elena felt tears threatening. She pushed them down. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that I understand, that I see the risk you're taking by trusting me, that I won't waste it. He slid a folder across the counter. New contract, guaranteed hours, health benefits, a salary that reflects what you're actually worth, not what the market says I can get away with paying you. Elena's hands shook as she opened the folder. The numbers on the page didn't make sense. They were too high. Almost double what she was making now. I can't. This is too much. It's not enough, Richard interrupted. But it's a start. And if you stay, if you give me a chance to prove this is real, then we'll revisit it in 6 months, along with something else. He pulled out another paper. A college fund. For Danny. Full ride to any school that accepts him, when the time comes. Elena couldn't stop the tears now. They came hot and fast, years of fear and exhaustion pouring out. Why? Because your son saw the truth when everyone else, including me, refused to look. Because he spoke up when it cost him everything to do it. Because talent and intelligence don't care about zip codes or bank accounts. Richard's voice softened. And because maybe if I do this right, I can remember who I'm supposed to be. Elena wiped her eyes, looked at the contract. At the man who'd spent months being just an employer and was now trying to become something more complicated. Something like decent. What about Danny? She asked. You really meant it? About him coming here after school? I'd like him to, if he wants to. Richard hesitated. I need to apologize to him. Properly. For laughing. For dismissing him. For making him feel like he didn't matter. He's 9. He'll forgive you. That doesn't mean I don't owe him the apology. Elena closed the folder, held it against her chest like a shield, or maybe a promise. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, we'll try. But if anything changes, if this turns out to be just guilt or charity, I need you to tell me. Don't let us build hope on something that isn't real. I promise. Richard extended his hand. Elena shook it. His grip was firm, but not crushing. Equal, like they were two people making an agreement. Not an employer bestowing mercy. Thank you, she whispered. Thank your son, Richard replied. He's the one who started all this. 3 blocks away, Danny Martinez sat in his 3rd grade classroom, staring at a math worksheet he couldn't focus on. He kept thinking about his mother, about the look on her face this morning, about the way she'd said, when I come home early, instead of, if. His teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, stopped beside his desk. Danny, everything okay? He nodded automatically. Yes, ma'am. You haven't written anything in 20 minutes. Because his mother was probably getting fired right now. Because they'd probably have to move again. Because he'd tried to do the right thing, and it was going to cost them everything. But he couldn't say that. So he picked up his pencil and wrote, 7/8/56. Ms. Rodriguez squeezed his shoulder once, gentle, then moved on. She knew. Teachers always knew. But knowing didn't fix anything. The morning dragged. Lunch came and went. Danny ate alone, like always, trying not to think about his mother sitting on their worn couch, circling job ads in the newspaper. At 2:15 p.m., the classroom phone rang. Ms. Rodriguez answered, listened, then looked at Danny with an expression he couldn't read. Danny, you need to gather your things. Someone's here to pick you up. His stomach dropped. Early pickup meant emergency. Emergency meant everything had fallen apart. He packed his backpack with shaking hands. walked to the office like he was walking to his own funeral. But it wasn't his mother waiting in the office. It was Richard Thornton, wearing jeans and a regular shirt, looking completely out of place among the plastic chairs and children's artwork. He stood when Danny entered, his hands in his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them. "Hi, Danny," he said. And then, before anyone else could speak, "I owe you an apology." Danny stared. The office secretary stared. Ms. Rodriguez, who'd followed him down, stared. "I laughed at you," Richard continued. "I dismissed you. I made you feel small and unimportant. And I was wrong. Completely, thoroughly wrong. You were the only person in that room brave enough to speak the truth. And I'm sorry I didn't listen the first time you tried to tell me." Danny felt his throat close up. "It's okay. It's not okay. But I'm going to do better." Richard crouched down to Danny's eye level. "Your mom said yes, to all of it. The new contract, the hours, the college fund. And I'm here to ask if you'd be willing to give me a second chance. Come to the house after school. Do homework. Have dinner with us. Let me prove that last night meant something." Danny looked at Ms. Rodriguez. She nodded slightly, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Where's my mom?" Danny asked. "At the house, waiting for you." Richard smiled, small and uncertain. "She wanted to be here, but we figured you might prefer a familiar face for the drive home. You're driving me? If that's okay with you." Danny thought about the bus ride, about going home to their empty apartment, about his mother's tears this morning. Then he thought about last night, about speaking up even when he was terrified, about the way Richard had looked at him after the investors left, really looked at him, maybe for the first time. "Okay," Danny said. "Let's go." Richard stood, relief clear on his face. "Thank you for giving me a chance." As they walked out to the parking lot, to a car that cost more than 5 years of his mother's old salary, Danny realized something. Last night had broken glass, but today was about building something new from the pieces, something that might actually last. The car ride was silent for the first 3 minutes. Danny sat in the back seat of Richard's Mercedes, watching the city blur past the window. The leather smelled new. Everything in this car probably cost more than his mom made in a year. "You can sit up front if you want," Richard said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "I'm okay back here." Another minute of silence. Then Richard cleared his throat. "Your teacher seems nice, Ms. Rodriguez." "She is. She looked surprised when I showed up." Everyone was surprised. Danny finally looked at Richard's reflection in the mirror. "Rich people don't usually pick up kids from my school." Richard winced. "I suppose they don't. It's okay. I'm used to being the different one. That shouldn't be something you're used to." Richard pulled up to a red light, turned slightly in his seat. "Danny, I need you to understand something. What I'm trying to do here, with the contract, the college fund, bringing you to the house, it's not charity." "What is it then?" "It's me trying to be less of an idiot." The light turned green. Richard drove. "My whole life I've surrounded myself with people who tell me I'm smart, who agree with everything I say, who laugh at my jokes even when they're not funny. And somewhere along the way, I started believing I actually was the smartest person in every room." Danny said nothing, just listened. Then a 9-year-old proved me wrong in front of everyone. Richard's voice caught. "And instead of being grateful, my first instinct was to laugh, to dismiss you, to protect my ego instead of protecting my business. You didn't know I really spoke French. I didn't care enough to find out." Richard pulled into his driveway, killed the engine, turned to face Danny fully. "That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not that I didn't believe you, that I didn't even consider you might be telling the truth." Danny unbuckled his seatbelt slowly. "My mom says rich people don't see us. They see through us, like we're glass. Your mom is right." Richard opened his door.